stream the meeting.
So is it showing my first slide?
Yes, we have your first
Okay.
slide here.
Okay. I believe we are already live on YouTube. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Shall we
So,
begin?
okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope that everyone is up and ready this cool and rainy morning. We have participants not only in our Zoom session but also in our YouTube channel. This webinar is the first in a series planned by the Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory. There are 9 weeks planned for our webinars. Each week there will be something for you to watch, and these, of course, are connected to your subject to help you with your studies, to guide you, to give you instructions. Okay. The ELSL has gone through great lengths to invite both local and international speakers to share and impart with you their experience, their knowledge, and even their research um, to you, our students. So I am sure that these will be an excellent learning experience for all of us. The talk will run for about 45 minutes, thereafter to be followed by a Q&A. Our moderator for this webinar is Professor Charles Darapisa. We have as a rapporteur to summarize the talk after the Q&A, Professor Madonna Danao. So with that, I'd like to turn over the uh, the screen time to Professor Charles Darapisa to introduce our speaker for this morning. Charles?
All right. Good morning, everyone. I am Carl Justin Derapisa, and I will be your moderator for today. I would like to formally welcome you to today's webinar, What is Landscape Architecture? A webinar introducing landscape architecture. All right, I guess it's about time. Our speaker is a seasoned landscape architect with over 10 years of experience in design in a wide range of international and local projects in Singapore. He is currently an associate member in WATG Singapore Incorporated. WATG is an international firm with 75 years of experience in the hospitality industry. Apart from his local projects in Singapore, he also did several projects in China, Greece, South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, Spain, Malaysia, and of course here in our country, the Philippines. He is an accredited landscape architect both in the Philippines and in Singapore. And I must say, a proud alumnus of our landscape architecture program here in UP Diliman. He aims to always bring forth strong knowledge in sustainable systems that provide him a good foundation for his sensitive design approach. He is committed to finding new ways of workflows in the ever evolving landscape architecture industry, and he is going to tell us all about it. So without further ado, I give you landscape architect Herbert Julius Montevirgen.
Thank you for those kind and unwarranted introduction, Carl. Not used to being introduced in that way. But nevertheless, I'm honored and grateful to be part of this and to kick off this, as what Mr. Dan said, the first of a series of talks of webinars and stuff. And I hope for this, my goal is to somehow replace some of your first impressions of what landscape architecture is and expand it even more. And that thus I wanted to call this Beyond Green. We always allocate greenery as to landscape architecture, but I want you to have open minds and see beyond what is green and to be open to what is landscape architecture. I wanted to start off this webinar with three questions, especially for the first year students. What do landscape architects design? What is the main element of that we use as landscape architects, and what do we end up as upon graduation? What's the career path? And as I mentioned about first impressions, I am pretty sure I, I'm gonna quickly go through these three questions, and in hoping capture the first thing in your mind, especially the first year in landscape architecture. And the question of what do they design? Um, I think the first and foremost idea that comes up into our mind is we design gardens. True enough, I think that's not a lie in itself, but that is only part and parcel of what landscape architects are designed as a profession, and it falls under the community and open spaces. In fact, one of the smallest in scale is the gardens, and beyond it, you go to playgrounds, neighborhood parks, sports fields, and expand even to regional scale plazas, recreational centers, urban gardens, even cemeteries. So you can say from the start of life to end of life, we are able to have a touch on it as a space. But I said it's just a slice of what we as designers look into, because we also is very much in touch with ecological landscapes, and these are everything that concerns about nature parks, industrial nature, reforestation, successional road and roads to rivers. So everything that encompasses ecology and ecosystem. And then beyond the green, we lead into the blue and the green infrastructure. These are all your water bodies. We also look into how do we preserve, conserve, and work with the waterways of within the space that we're designing. And we go to the fringe of the horticulturists, wherein we look into productive landscapes. These concerns about urban farming, aquaculture, hydroponics, and such. And lastly, the transitional landscapes. These are transitory in nature, whether if it's associated with events or some art exhibition or some urban events that transpires in the city. So when okay, let me go to the second quick question. It is what is their main element of design? And from first year, you will be exposed to a lot of trees, and you'll be a lot concerning on memorizing all their Latin names. But this is just part of what we call the softscape. And obviously, softscape involves trees and shrubs. And in my office, I deal with a lot of architects, and they always call it bushes and shrubs instead of shrubs. That we deal with bushes, but again, softscape is just one and part and parcel of it. If you want to see the whole expanse of what we look into, we consider the paving material, the site furnishing, benches, what kinds of lighting we put into it, how do we approach the water features into this in the site, and the sculptures and artwork, and element of play if it's a recreational park, and as well as those intangible ones, like how do we manage water, how do we irrigate our softscape, and how do we work with the contours and grading, and those that really touch and deal with people and community, its culture, history. So to recap, trees, landscape architects go beyond trees and greenery, and touch in every parcel of these. So what do we end up as there's this always famous um, um, connotation that we are glorified gardeners, and maybe at first when I was your age as a first year student, I really hated it being referred to it as glorified gardeners, but in some way it affected my confidence as a designer, and in some way believed in it. But in the profession, my 10 years of exposure in the industry, I see a lot of my peers and friends leading to different paths. Some of them uh, focus on designing play equipment or looked into becoming artists in sculpture, just designing the art pieces in the landscape, or they expand their scale of design and become planners and urban designers, or lean towards more of the environmentalists. Some of them become project managers, heritage conservationists, professors, and researchers. And and these are not one single profession. Some of them are actually a mix of profession. I miss the specialized designers. Um, the specialized designers, if I go back one slide, some specialized designers pick just one of these and become designers of it. Like for example, site furnishing. I have a friend who just designs benches and playground, and the whole company is about playground. So that's also something that the profession also end up as a career. So as a summary, I'd like to take a few steps back and look into the built design environment. So if you imagine a city, we know the city is composed of different components, and in the four major designers of the built environment, the smallest of scale, not to say that they're least in complexity, the interior designers looked into the inside of the building, and obviously the architects look the buildings itself, and landscape looks at everything outside of it. And if you go beyond in scale, that's what master planning is. In my previous company, landscape architects and master planners are one and the same. But in my current company, we have a distinct separation between the two. But nonetheless, both are the, almost the same in scope and thinking, but equally different. As you can see later, I will show what master planning and landscape, what's the interface and intersection. So I like you to focus on the landscape architecture. So over here, I've listed down some of the components we see: softscape, drainage, irrigation, stormwater management, earthworks and grading, water feature, site furnishing, lighting, play equipments, and even wayfinding and signage. And each of these components, in the whole grand scheme of things, we deal with other consultants, and these are other our peers in the profession. We consult with engineers primarily for our earthworks and grading. We engage our horticulturists and environmental scientists in consideration of the trees and conservation of it and planting it. And the list goes on as I've listed here: pool designers, site furniture designer, lighting designers, wayfinding, and play consultant. So we are in the midst of the building design environment, and very much part of it. So we started with those three questions, and I want to project now into these three aspirations that I see landscape architects are. First, we design for the future, we design with the environment, and we design experiences. So first I'd like to go to we design for the future. And Ian McCard, the father of planners, have this saying that we cannot screw up the future for the present. So we should always begin with the future in mind, the future generations in mind whenever we design. I'd like to bring you towards one project of mine I've done. This is in Vietnam, central Vietnam, in Lang Co. And this is actually a master planning level. This is 184 hectares in size. And at the moment, it's just land. In between the sea, there's a lagoon and a lake. And before we come up with this design, before I came up with this scenario, master planning is about looking at the land parcels. If I have 184 hectares of land, the owner of it or the developer of this land is interested in how do I gain value in my land. So what's the type of mix? Do I look into whether I mix it with hotel, villas, apartments, or in short, future development for this land? And this is what we call a land use schedule. And a land use schedule primarily divides the totality of the area into distinct different parcels with specific use. And the message of this must tie in with a vision, and it starts with a framework. Looking at the place that the space belongs to, the country, and I call it the four abundances. I always look for what's the abundance of the site, and in this case, I highlighted the site is surrounded by mountains. It has a very strong heritage component into it, flanked by the sea to its west and lagoon to its east. So I consider it as the four abundances, and from there, I want to create this experience or vision of having a unique shopping experience, new luxury living, and multi generational play. And in that vision, I'd like to highlight three key experiences of cultural: the refined, the active, the high octane, the adventure, and the chill, and to create this Langko beach town. And as I've said, everything starts with a vision, and the vision of this project was to create that diversity among the synergy of the water experience and a new retail of destination, and at the same time having a prime beachfront resort. So, and then from that vision, it goes to some key strategies. As you can see here, the scale is really, really big. The first strategy involves how do I access the site, whether by plane, by ship, or even by road. So this is city scale level in terms of strategic thinking. And from that vision, we form this story of experiences of the site, of being able to enjoy the high octane adrenaline rush activities and having this adventure lagoon, but at the same time a leisure lagoon, which is more relaxed and tranquil, coupled with the retail destination. So in closing for this project, it's about creating a future framework for development. And I think as landscape architects, we have this capability of defining what the future is. Even you can say it's a very loose way of defining the future, but a very important one. Like for here, this is a sketch of the vision of that development, but this translates to the future development of the area, whether it's gonna be picked up by an architect to design this retail design, or each of the parcel is gonna be given to different landscape architects to design. So it's defining and designing the future of an area as a landscape architect. I'm not sure. Do we invite questions, or Carl, or do I continue?
We're
Okay.
gonna do the question
Herbert,
and answer after Lloyd.
actually, you have about 25 minutes. You still have a lot of time. Uh,
Okay. Actually, I still have two questions. Two aspirations as I mentioned. So yeah, a couple more projects.
All
Okay,
right, no
I'll go
problem.
on. Yeah. So the second aspirations I'd like to consider is that we obviously design with the environment, and this is with nature. My former boss, Herbert, and I was very fortunate to work on this as my first project, which is the Bishan Park here in Singapore. He said that water is the first landscape architect, and he is very much influential in my career, and that's why I fell in love with water and everything blue beyond green. And what is stormwater management? So Herbert Dreisaitl, my former boss, He was very much in love with water and at the same time an artist himself. And he was very curious, always curious. First question he would always ask is, what if I have a site and there's a drop of water, where does it lead and go to? So in any development as designers, whenever we touch in the environment, as you can see, this is the pre-development stage. But as soon as we develop it, the storm water in an area increases, and this increases flood, and that's a given because we increase the hardscape of a specific area. And so as a designer, a landscape architect, we are very cognizant of, from the first drop of water droplet from the rain, where does it first surface contact? How do we treat it along the way? How do we collect it along the way? And how do we store it along the way? And that's what stormwater management is. Um, it's it's a parcel of a piece of pie in this system of water, in conjunction with water supply and the wastewater. And as landscape architects, we are very much have this opportunity to work with stormwater to aid in alleviation of wastewater, and as well as to supply more for and replenish more our water supply. I won't go much into this detail. It's very quite technical, but we have this series of elements that we use in intervention and strategies to treat, to detain, to store, and to convey water along the way within the site. And this is primarily what we've done for Bishan Park. We have introduced vegetated swales, rain garden, detention lawn, porous paving, and constructed wetland. So as a contrast, if I'm an engineer and I look into a site, my first instinct would be to provide drains everywhere, right? I need to collect water as an engineer, and I need to flush this rainwater runoff as soon as I can. But landscape architectural thinking is, we could have another option of a softer and greener option than a huge culverts or huge drains, and these are these bioswales and rain garden. So the Kalan Vision Park, I'm proud to say that this was in that year of the World Architecture Festival. It beat actually the Gardens by the Bay, and I wasn't that surprised because this was more ecological and very very simple as a concept. The upper right image here is the concept. In fact, that's the concept, which was this was a 20-meter size drain, which was very technical in nature to collect stormwater during heavy rains. But the concept was to make it into a natural river within the city, and it's 3 kilometers long. And alongside it, to recreate that natural river, we introduced bioengineering techniques into it, and we tested each one of them, their success rate and stuff. So these are some of them. I like to just play the transformation of that city. This has audio, so but I don't think I'll play the entire video. But uh, it, up to now, this was my first project, but up to now, I can say one of my most favorite project I ever work upon, because I could see how it changed the environment, but at the same time changed lives of the people around it, and how a design of a landscape architect really really touched lives of people around. Is there audio? Could you hear audio from the video? No.
No,
No,
Herbert.
we
No.
couldn't hear it.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. It's okay. That's just a glimpse of this. It's, as I've said, it's a 3 kilometer long river, and this is Gabions, one of the strategies that we've used for bioengineering techniques. Instead of hard walls and concrete, channels, we introduced a very, very soft, and it soon biodiversity came into the city, into the park, and more so. We've seen otters as a regular um, resident of this river and stuff. Okay, I'll carry on. So my last and third point is, as designers and landscape architects, we design experiences, and this experience must be timeless, and thus we consider, when we say timeless, at least 20 years of existence, and not just a whim of the designer, because just purely aesthetics, but consideration of experience for a long time. This is a resort in China, very, very much a five-star resort, and it involves scripting the journey with a lot of attention to detail, exquisite execution of hardscape, complemented by landscape. But beyond that, as a landscape architect, I wanted to consider that as any development, whether if it's for public or five-star quality, it involves touching the environment, and thus we must be able to intervene the site with sustainable thinking, and we've considered how do we alter the and preserve the lake edge, for example, and this was a very much influence of my previous company. How do we work with stormwater with this development, and how do I channel, and how do I store and treat my runoff from the roads before it leads into the lake? And the client really loved it, because he knew that the lake is the prime selling point for this development, and thus keeping it clean and treating the water before it goes into the lake was very, very much welcome as an idea. And another resort in China, this was a competition. This is the last that I'll be sharing. Uh, Also a five-star hotel. Um, Always starts with what the location is. Just a bit north of Shanghai, about agrarian in nature, farming, all about farming, and that's what the inspiration that as a landscape architect I tried to get, and defined four key experiences, and this was the first key experience I wanted to convey in the design, which is waterfront experience. I wanted to convey the experience of being elevated, floating, hanging, suspended, swinging, and that thus even in site furnishing complemented by landscape, I want to have this elevated experience. The second experience is the seasonal experience. Philippines don't have four seasons, but in most in China, four seasons, especially autumn and spring, is very, very much celebrated. And I wanted to harness the seasonal experience into multi-use of space, seasonal, transitory, and the flexibility of the design. Um, and as well to weave into this connected experience, connected with nature in terms of systemic landscape, productive landscape, and the water cycle story, and all of this. And the last experience I wanted to convey was funscape. How do I involve play into my design, whether if it's for all ages, inclusive, and diversified. So perhaps I was gonna skip through this. I just want to show how a certain facet of design, which is softscape, trees and shrubs, can be really, really stretched out in terms of thinking. How do we celebrate trees and shrubs in a design? So I want to recreate a scent of a trail of scent as you go through the site, and define what species we consider, and what we want us to for the guests to experience within the site. Or how do I use plants to recreate this element of play? How do I engage the five senses and for kids while they are in the spaces of play? Or how do I celebrate the seasons and know my planting? When will it bloom? Um, how do I recreate from January to December this uh, spectrum of flowers throughout the year? And how do I do more than planting? And this thinking was a technical hydrophonic tower. How do I make it very, very memorable for the guest? And I remember this. The inspiration of this was one of my trips in Kyoto. The lower left image. That image is in one train station in Kyoto, and I just remembered, why don't I make something very sculptural like this, convert the hydrophonic tower into something memorable for the guests, and thus this sculptural hydrophonic columns came into the picture. I'll end with this competition video we've presented. Uh, uh, it's a shame there's no sound, but I'll just talk through it. This is a very much integrated effort. So I was very much connected with our architects and interior designers. And as you see, you couldn't tell which one is interiors, which one is landscape, and which one is architecture. In fact, this is a plant library, very much ingrained into the building, within the interior space. Probably expectation is for us to design tea gardens as such, but even wedding chapels, landscape architects have very much say and in conversation with architects in their pool for hotel guests, and even skyrise greenery, rooftop green roofs and greenhouses. So this is very much hospitality driven. These are iconic hotels. And this last point of creating experience, I really take in very, very important as a designer. A very, very powerful tool that we could convey to guests and people memorable experiences. So as an epilogue, I'd like to even say a statement that landscape architecture is very, very much in the forefront of the design industry. And I say this, just look at the brochures of all the condominiums or even park or hotels for that matter. The very, very first image, in fact, would be a landscape feature. And I remember one of the Marriott president visited our company here, in fact, and he asked this question: if you've been in one of our hotels, what is that one memorable experience you can remember? And with all the answers and stuff, he mentioned it was all about landscape. He said, not very much of the facade of the building, not so much of the interiors, but the outdoor experience. And when I knew this is one of my first swimming pools I've designed, and it made way to K-pop in this, was used as a backdrop for his music video. And if you see here, there's no hotel. It's all about landscape. It's all about the swimming pool. It's all about that experience. And it summarizes, that was the selling point. In fact, the architecture was the background. Not to say that putting it behind, but landscape is very much in the forefront in terms of selling experiences, creating value in the design build experience. So I go back to the three questions I have. What do they design? What is the main element of design? And what do we end up as? And I say, beyond more than us being the green in between, or glorified gardeners, we are the custodians of the built environment. And beyond for us planting trees, we create and memorable experiences and become the catalyst for innovation. So that's it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, landscape architect Herbert. That was a very convincing, comprehensive, appealing, and truly an inspirational presentation for us all. I also like the fact that you carefully reiterated and enumerated the design spaces that landscape architects commonly do. It is, I guess, critical that we emphasize not just mainly to raise awareness about our discipline, but the wide array of landscape components that we specialize in, be it in benches or playgrounds, corridors, and even spaces with particularly cultural significance. And I do agree that we landscape architects, we design for the future, we design with the environment, and we design experience. I guess this is also a particularly important and inspirational moment, not only for our LA 11 students, but also to our students who are enthusiastic about our design spaces and outdoor spaces. And we are now to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through chat and comment section, be it on Zoom and on YouTube. So to all the participants, this is where your enthusiasm and passion for landscape architecture come in. I guess we have one question here in our YouTube live. Um, he asked, how far into the future are we supposed to consider? I
How
guess
far?
he's referring to the design spaces that you've mentioned and enumerated to us.
Yes, I think it's a good consideration. We are not futurists, or foretell the future, but obviously we have stakeholders to look after, and each of these developments have their own owners or operators or what we call clients. So first and foremost, we consider what is the client's vision for his development, and when I say future, then you consider and you project 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, what will this development bring? What value will this development bring for the client and the stakeholders that you are working for?
All right, thank you for that precise answer. We have another question from the same subscriber, I guess. How applicable are these examples to the Philippine landscape?
Um, I guess obviously the hotels and resorts, I consider it booming in fact in Philippines, and as a design industry, alongside with our tourism, how as it before COVID, and I hope it will come back to that state. um, I consider tourism industry is really booming alongside with the construction boom, and thus it's very applicable in terms of creating these experiences for guests and for tourists. The other example of stormwater management, I think, is very apt in terms of flood mitigation, being able to treat our waterways and consider it within our spaces and not a relegated to the side as a side drain or something. So I see it a very, very huge potential on stormwater management and at the same time hospitality driven design.
All right. We have a question here in our Zoom chat from Irish Castillo. Thank you for the substantial and informative talk, Sir Herbert. Well, I read about new urbanism where trees should be considered as public health infrastructure because it helps our mental state. But considering that Metro Manila lacks it, would there be another way to implement it in the future or some initiative we can do as substitute to new urbanism to help improve people's mental state?
Yes. I say, obviously, uh, in the realm of landscape architecture, I still consider trees as a main element for that well-being for society. And I can give an example. Singapore as a city is very, very urban, and they have a strong policy on creating this greenery context amidst the urban setting. And if our government is able to, if the Philippine government has this willpower to have this urban and greenery marriage, and I think that's still possible. Um, in here, a lot of skyrise greenery, green roofs. There's a lot of hardscape, but at the same time, a lot of softscape because of the support of the public and government sector. So if that, I can see if designers we push for it, there's still a chance for us to be able to incorporate this greenery as part of the infrastructure for our well-being.
Okay, we have another question here from Andy Guzman. Hello, may I ask what you did after graduating? Did you take masters or go straight to working?
Ma'am Zenny would know this. I went straight. I went. I went straight to Singapore. um, yeah. Yeah. It's a long story, but I after that, due to personal reasons, I needed to work right away and missed out on the fun in Philippines. So yeah.
All right, I guess we have a follow-up question. Thank you, sir. Yes, we hope for that greenery. But we also have biophilic design, right, where there is an incorporation of nature into the built environment. Do you think it might become a stronger design determinant?
Yes, biomimicry, biophilic design. Architects love this. But if you ask me, as landscape architects, we have the prime element that we could use, which are softscape and greenery, and mimicking it in terms of a very architectural component. Like for example, the facade looks like this um, 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 to mimic the environment and stuff. Uh, it would be good, but at the same time, as landscape architects, I think it's stronger to use the main component of greenery to for the built environment for urban setting, in fact. So I think it's instead of replacing it with something to mimic nature, we should blend nature within the urban fabric, and I think that's a stronger approach as opposed to let's keep it very urban and just mimic in the environment.
All right, in connection to that answer, actually, we have another question about that. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sir Herbert. What is your personal mindset or philosophy in dealing with smaller scale projects, especially in congested urban settings where we do not have the luxury of the expansive landscape or spaces? I think this would be helpful for everyone starting a practice in landscape architecture like us. Thank you.
Hmm.
What is your personal
Um,
mindset or design philosophy?
Tough question.
Yeah,
From how wide and how big the scale space, but um, the thinking is still the same. In fact, it's as I've said, it's for the experience, designing with the environment and creating, designing for the people, and regardless of the scale, whether if it's a garden for your client or a villa garden or to 100 hectares of land design, the principles of design is still the same in terms of harmony, texture, creating texture, hierarchy, scale, all of this remains the same. And that vision of creating experience and consideration of the environment is still the same. So I say whether if it's small scale, big scale, um, we all go back and start with those same principles of design.
All right, these are very tough questions, I must say. Are you still okay, Sir Herbert?
Still okay.
Okay, hold on. Okay, we have another question here. Taking in consideration that a landscape architect is a mediator between the owner's vision and the environment's condition, what should be your most priority between the two?
I think
Between
good
the owner's
question.
vision and the environment's condition.
I always encounter this in terms of you this buzzword of sustainability, right? And I think in our profession, sustainability is a lifelong learning experience of what is sustainability. I always want to say sometimes when I design a space, right, I feel bad because any development within the mountain setting will sure be destroying trees, will for sure displace the environment. And if we say we prioritize nature, solely nature, then we wouldn't end up with any development and built environment at all. And so we must look sustainability in its truest sense in its three components. Sustainability has the economic component, the people component, and the environment component. And for a project to be sustainable, these three components must be considered. If it's solely, like for example, Gardens by the Bay, I will give that as an example. Everyone likes it. We see it as a celebration of landscape architecture and stuff. But it was forested area before, and then now they have replaced it with something very artificial. You may say, but the economic aspect of it brought a lot of economic opportunities for that region. In fact, the entire residential area around that place, uh, the value of it went up by 10 times, in fact. So the economic factor, in conjunction with the environmental factor, created this sustainable project in itself. So I must say you must look at this sustainability in those three aspects of design, not solely for the environment and the economic. So if it's purely economic, then that's when it's so bad. If you should always have all of these components in mind.
All right. Let me just jump to our YouTube live. I think we have a question here from Nico Lumano. How we, as an architect or designer, can cater to the general public, specifically to the masses or lower class?
Good
Tough question.
question. Yeah.
Mhm.
When I went to my current company, you might say that like we're designing for the bourgeois or something, for the five-star hotel and all of this luxury setting and stuff. But you always consider that every place that you design, there's a community and locals that in context. So in some way, even they're not the owners of these developments, especially if it's I'm talking about hotels and stuff. They are able to these developments are able to create jobs for the locals, and you must always consider the local context whenever you design these private spaces. But as you've seen in Vision Park, if you end up designing public spaces, then that's the best ground for you to touch lives in every different strata of the society, including the masses. And in fact, that's what one of my aspirations and my wish for Philippines, for example. to preserve these natural public spaces that we have in the Philippines, whether if it's I don't know, BGC, Aroseros Park, all of these are public spaces that we as landscape architects can design and enhance and be able to touch lives in different aspects and different levels.
All right, thanks for that wonderful answer. So, if for those of you who have yet to subscribe to our YouTube channel, search for Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory. That's on YouTube and on Facebook, or you can check out the link provided to you in the chat panel. Again, that is Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory, both on YouTube and on Facebook. All right, let's go back to our Zoom chat panel. Good morning, sir. How do you feel about mall culture in the Philippines? Do you think that our urban planners should encourage parks and other public spaces that allow interaction with the environment? If so, how can we encourage people in using the spaces through tropical landscape architecture?
Mall culture. Yeah, I think that's a very, very Filipino way, or I must say, more than a culture, I think it's a sign that as people we want open spaces. And and due to lack of green spaces and public spaces around, the next best thing for us are actually malls. And I remember that back then, Trinoma, when I was still a student, in my second year, our go-to place would be Trinoma. In fact, and from school we would go to Trinoma to appreciate open space and design the water features over there, the gardens and stuff. And I think more than a culture, it's actually a sign for us people craving for open spaces, and thus there's nothing wrong with it. It's actually a sign that we need to fight for more open spaces around that. So um, true. Sadly, as people, obviously, as you've seen in Aroseros Park, right, the last standing park in Manila, that was a good example of how we public could affect change in terms of fighting for these open spaces. So we must we must recognize as a people that we want these open spaces, but we shouldn't settle just for malls, but also try to be advocates for open spaces in our surrounding. I don't know if I answered the last question. What was the last question? I forgot the last statement.
Hold on. um, Nawala na siya. We have tons of questions here in our chat panel. If so, how can we encourage people in using the spaces through tropical landscape architecture?
How can we encourage people using the spaces? Actually, when you provide the space, people will come. When you design a space, people will come. How do you encourage it? We Through design, a good design will always bring people in, and because good design, nature in itself is inviting, but you couple of that with the principles of design in terms of hierarchy, texture, scale, harmony. All of these components gives this aesthetic value to it, which people appreciate because people tend to be attracted with beauty and aesthetics. So I guess that's what designers are for. Otherwise, uh, nature in itself is good enough, but as designers, we enhance it and complement it with aesthetics.
All right, in connection to that answer, maybe you could shed light on this question. How can landscape architecture be of great help to people who suffer from mental problems during the pandemic?
Very much, very much. During the pandemic, there was also lockdown over here, and I stay in this small room, and my mental wellness, I recognize the fact that I need to be able to be in touch with nature, and a simple walk outside for a few minutes instantly rejuvenates my mental well-being. And I think that emphasizes how nature is a natural healer in terms of our mental well-being. And 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 I guess that's a very distinct component that we couldn't replicate anywhere else. No matter how much IKEA furniture I buy, it wouldn't be recognized. And I think that's why this plantitos and plantitas is becoming a trend. We recognize that fact that we are very much in touch with nature, and we crave for something that is natural amidst for our mental well-being.
All right. We have questions concerned about small spaces, and now we go to global crisis. As a landscape architect, how might this global crisis affect curriculum content, emphasis, and how we educate future landscape architects and planners?
Curriculum content.
Did I get that right? Yeah,
You mean the pandemic? How does the pandemic affect our future curriculum?
I believe so.
Um, I think the mindset will differ in terms of social distancing and stuff. But in fact, it highlights that the outdoor space as a putting in the forefront. In fact, it puts landscape environment at the forefront of what people aspire for, what people want to see, and what are the essential in lives of people. And so um, how it affects the curriculum, I guess, uh, it puts landscape in the forefront again. These open spaces as the main aspiration for and what people really miss amidst this pandemic situation.
All right. Well, we have one question based on, I guess he's interested about your experience working abroad. Hi, Sir Herbert. Regarding to the firm or work as a landscape architect abroad, is it required to take their own landscape architecture board exam?
Mm. I want to actually dwell on that question. It is something I appreciate. And I guess I haven't told this to Ma'am Zenny. Philippines have a law, right, that supports landscape architects. And I remember Ma'am Zenny as my professor for that professional practice. And it's LA 9053. And that law, I sadly, I learned about it, but I appreciate it more when I reached in Singapore because landscape architects here in Singapore is not actually recognized by law. We have a society, the Society of Institute of Landscape Architects, but it's not backed by law. And I say, and in that sense, I really, really appreciated how people and with people like Mamzani pushed for a law as such to safeguard landscape architects. And in fact, I envy that because as a profession, it is recognized by law, Philippines, but Singapore is not. And a lot of countries are the same way as well. And it's a huge factor. In fact, when you have the country or the lawmakers backing you up as a profession. And it's quite ironic because Singapore is very much green garden city and stuff, but they don't recognize landscape architects. As far we don't have board examinations here. We It's called accreditation in landscape architects, so there's no board exams. And in that sense, Philippines is miles away as a profession of landscape architecture.
All right. Um, how are you so far with these questions?
Okay. Interesting. I've never thought of these questions when I was freshman.
Yeah, that's true.
So
Um,
when an architect approaches any of you to say, "Can you draw circles for me? Those circles, green circles for my plan." You can mention I can do more than that because I remember being approached by an architect in the same department to draw circles in their plan, and I was like, "Okay, I'll do that for you." But looking back at it 10 years ago, I could have said I can do more than that. right?
Yes, surely. Well, we have another question here. In the Philippines and in most countries, there is this corporate social responsibility where we provide attention and allocate resources for a bigger community. Have you experienced this in what you have been doing? And if yes, how would you describe it? Allocation of resources for a bigger community as a social
Yeah.
responsibility.
So a lot of the, for example, a lot of the planning exercises, because if it entails big land, the owner of the land would have to go through government agencies for approval, and that's the primarily use of the land use schedule, the land use plans, and submitted to the government in terms of how would I use my 200 hectares of land. And usually government would require to be able to give back to the existing social fabric within that given set of land. And in so doing, the landscape architects or the planners have this thinking of reallocating or even suggesting to the client some portions of land to be able to give back to the existing social fabric, whether if it's a parcel of land that for community enhancement, for community gathering, or a social housing and stuff. So these are actually examples of how we designers um, are able to do interventions in terms of social responsibility. So we can always ask the client to consider these things within our design.
Um, all right, I'm trying to screen our questions here. We would like to cover as diverse as possible questions. Okay, good morning, Sir Herbert. Any advice for freshmen who are struggling to create that sense of creativity and imagination? I know that it's quite early to say since that we just started our remote learning.
I don't think it's an early thing to say. In fact, I think it's a very, very valid question. And up to now, that's still that's also my question. How to myself always, how do I keep myself inspired and have that sense of creativity and imagination? Before, that's why I make use and make sure pre-COVID situation to be able to go out outdoor and if allowed travel during that time, and I saw traveling as a vital component of replenishing that creativity sense of creativity and imagination. But given the situation now that we are all locked down and stuff, I think there's still avenues for us to create this sense of creativity and imagination, and I see that in technology could be could augment that in terms of our social media. So instead of Instagram and stuff, I have this Pinterest as my source of inspiration in terms of design, and it's the next best thing to traveling, in fact. And in a given the start of a project, I would go to Pinterest for inspiration, and I can spend 2 to 3 hours and hundreds of tabs open into my Chrome browser. And before I know it, I'm already in France, looking at the details of the paving in there and stuff. And I think Pinterest is very, very good at curating. Once you pick one image, it tells you a very what's this? The same kind of image that you're looking for, and it's very good at that. And in that sense, it's like leading you to one place to another, and then you consider the spaces. So that's one. The others, I follow a lot of design blogs. So there's this dzine, design boom, all of these, and I subscribe to it. In terms of graphics, I use this visual capitalists. So as designers, I think you must have your own Pinterest boards, um, and subscribe to all of these blogs. In the olden days, this is equivalent to subscribing to magazines like Landzine or Landscape Architecture. But in this time, if you subscribe to design blogs, and whether if it's architecture design blogs like Design Boom or Design Dzine, these are architectural interiors and even product design. You It's all design. So whether if it's a feature of a lamp, you get inspiration from it in terms of form, in terms of attention to detail and stuff. So short answer, Pinterest and design blogs would you
All
be your
right.
next best thing to traveling. When travel comes back, make sure you travel too, even if it's local. That opens up your design capacity and imagination.
All right. You did mention about that Pinterest when we were in South Korea.
What? Yes. That's why I went out to meet you in outdoors. I want you to bring me out around. Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, surely, no problem. Um, okay, we have something one that's a little bit different, but let's see about this. How do we establish cultural identity through landscape architecture? But you did mention this in your presentation.
How do you establish? First, you recognize the sense of place and its existing social fabric that you're touching upon. If the place, uh, it's so whenever you're given a space, one of the first things you're gonna be receiving is the site boundary, which is like this hectares of land, and your first impression, okay, this is my boundary. I look into all of these, and that there's a great danger in doing that. In fact, it's implicitly stating this is your boundary. Just consider this. But as designers, always go beyond it. What's around it? So whenever I do site visits, I will go around and beyond the site boundary. In fact, the first thing is I will go around the site boundary and then look further around it and expose yourself to the social fabric within it. What's the community around it? What's the culture around it? What do they do as a profession? Is it farming? Is it fishing and stuff? And in so doing, then you get connected to this social element, and you consider that as into your design, and you become more sensitive as a designer. And it's a very good starting point, in fact, of your design. Always good starting point of your design, being inspired by the existing culture, the existing social fabric of the site.
All right. I guess we still have time for 2 to 3 more questions. Um, have you experienced, as a landscape architect, being involved in post crisis or post calamity situations where devastation is widespread and immediate actions or emergency response is the order of the day? If yes, how would you advise the budding LAs should they find themselves in such situation?
To be honest, haven't. I haven't experienced that. I think it's a very specialized area we're in. For example, is a devastated area. Maybe the closest example that I could, but I haven't directly worked on is if it's a heavily devastated area, then um, the how do you renew the space and to create value and recreate the space into a new environment. So I guess that's the closest. If it's a devastated um, um, area, how do you bring back in terms of the people, the the glory into the space? In fact, that's the history of my current company, WATG. The main reason why they focus on hotels and resorts was it was after the war, in that era, 1945, and it started in Hawaii and in Hawaii, Honolulu, wherein it was really really devastated by Pearl Harbor incident and stuff. And so the first one of the first founders of our company saw a great opportunity in terms of design in bringing back the spirit of renewal into a devastated space. So in that sense, which is a war-stricken society, so in relation to that, I can see the post-COVID situation. We could have the same thinking as landscape designers. We recognize that longing from people, longing for normalcy, being normal. And I think that's a very, very huge opportunity for us as landscape architects, in fact.
All right. You did mention a while ago that the Philippines, in fact, the Philippine landscape architecture is miles apart from what they do in Singapore in terms of in terms of accreditation. Maybe we can call on Professor Zenny Galingan to give us to add on that statement. Hello, Ma'am Zenny. Okay, she's there.
I actually I don't want to give my comment in here because I've been telling all my students in 139 as Herbert, architect Herbert Montevirgen had already mentioned earlier that accreditation for Singapore and then our law here in the Philippines is made to protect the practice, of course. So, and also the people, the users, the one who are using this space. Remember, licensing is there. So the main purpose is to protect the people. When it involves life and property, so there's always the licensure exam. So it's very important that we have that. So, and beside that, well, I don't want to bring it, but there were lots of, when we were proposing for the law, there were lots of foreign practitioners here in the Philippines. That was in the 90s. Okay, so in the 90s. And there were only very few landscape architects then. Were only about 20 plus, something like that, or even less. So protection. And they don't even know the character of our place, the culture of the people. So when they were designing for us, they really did not understand what we like. So I can cite so many examples, but the most prominent one is that when they're designing Shangri-La EDSA Hotel, the driveway itself, we have to change the entrance exit of the driveway because they were familiar of entering on the other side when suppose here in the Philippines, the other way around. So they did not really study our way of life. So it's better that people, landscape architects should understand really the culture of the people they are designing for. And licensing makes it the at least we know that when a landscape architect is accredited and licensed to do this particular kind of work, we can be sure that they have enough so much enough experience to be recognized as that. So that is really very important. I think that's all.
All right.
I
Thank you so much, Ma'am Zenny. Also, I would like to thank landscape architect Herbert Julius Montevirgen. You've given us, I think, you did more than just an introduction to landscape architecture. You've mentioned several things about sustainable designs, about hospitality industry, about your experiences working abroad and various landscape architecture projects. So, with that in mind, we are very much grateful for your contribution, for your time, for the effort that you put into for our participants today about our webinar. Maybe call on Professor Madonna Dano to give us a summary of what went through to our today's webinar.
Thank you,
Hello,
Charles.
Professor. Okay.
Okay, we would like to thank Sir Landscape Architect Herbert, a very young and accomplished resource speaker, for giving us and enlightening our freshmen and new students what is landscape architecture. So he raised three questions. What is LA design, landscape architecture design, the main elements of the design, and what did they end up to? Okay. So for the first question, landscape architects design community open spaces, not just the typical garden, but also our community parks and other regional parks. Also, he talks on we design also ecological landscape, blue and green infrastructure, working and productivity landscape, and even transitory landscapes. So the main elements of our design is particularly softscape or plant materials. But he also mentioned that aside from that, different components in the landscape are also important, like hardscape materials, furnishing, lighting, and even water features. Okay, so there are several components found in our landscape design. So landscape go beyond trees and greeneries. Okay, so what do they end up as a landscape architects? So he mentioned that landscape architect usually called the glorified gardeners. But according to him, this affected his confidence as a designer. Okay, so we expand to other professions like specialized designer, landscapes artists, environmentalists, and even urban planners. We are part of the built design environment, and we collab with other different disciplines in the field like architecture, interior design, and even engineering. And then finally, uh, he mentioned about his aspiration or the aspiration of landscape architects. Um, first aspiration is we design for the future. So we can we would like to start with the vision. Okay, start with the vision, and then this defines the future and translate this into our design. And then her second aspiration is we design for the environment. One example is the stormwater management he mentioned and the projects done by their company. Okay, and then a good example is the Kallang River Park, very sustainable, and it make it to a natural river and using bioengineering techniques and even gabions, and it touches the lives of many people around the particular river. And then the last aspiration is we design experiences. Okay, he mentioned that experiences should be timeless. Okay, for example, the resorts and other development he designed in China. Okay, so he also mentioned this experiences by providing different types of experiences, not just the sensory, the cultural. So all sorts of experiences can be felt in different designs. Okay, and then this is a powerful tool to convey memorable experiences. So finally, um, what goes beyond green is, to summarize it, landscape architects are custodians of the built environment, a curator of memorable experiences, and a catalyst for innovation. So our students also raised several questions regarding new urbanism, design philosophy, biophilic designs, sustainability, and even uh, how can we cater to the masses as designers, and uh, different types of open spaces like the mall culture, and we should be able to recognize open spaces and encourage the use of spaces in our design, because good design brings people in. Okay. And for the final question is about the post-crisis design, uh, and how can we create this post-crisis and post-calamity experience by our, not just our country, but all over the world. So that's it. Thank you for giving us this very inspiring talk, Herbert. We wish we could still invite you in some of our future webinars.
The
Okay.
pleasure and honor is mine. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Sir Dan, Ma'am Zenny, and Sir Carl. You're welcome. You're welcome.
We are very proud that you are here. We appreciate very much that you uh, give us this opportunity for you to talk in our with our students here.
Thank you as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, landscape architect Herbert. And to formally close our event and introduce next week's webinar, we have again our Professor Dan Villajuan. Sir?
Okay, thank you, Charles. So once again, I'd like to say thanks, a big, very big round of thanks to landscape architect Herbert Montevirgen. We are very proud that you're able to provide us with this webinar. I am sure that um, you know your talk has enlightened and inspired our students, both new and continuing. Um, of course, yes, it provided, I'm certain that it provided a clearer understanding of the practice of the profession, the scope of landscape architecture, and what it can do, what it can provide, and that it truly is at the forefront of design. Okay. Um, so with that, and like I said earlier, there is we have a series for our webinars. Next week, Tuesday, we will have another webinar. This will be hosted by the second year level. Subject matter will cover landscape ecology and plant aesthetics. Again, um, the the um, the contents of these webinars are very important. The speakers will provide all our students and everyone, for that matter, added knowledge and guidance on what we need to do for our subjects and essentially what we need to do in our practice. So with that, I'd like to give thanks to everyone who graced our webinar, first year profs, professors, our landscape architecture faculty, and of course our beloved students. Thank you and good morning to everyone.
Thank you, Herbert. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you everyone. Thanks again, landscape architect Herbert